Hi, Jonathan York by Financial Partners, looking at investment markets. In the end, a pretty sort of standard, sort of no-frill speech came out of Jackson Hole from Fed Chairman Powell. Still had the same rhetoric that the Fed was prepared to increase interest rates if needed. Potentially they could go higher if inflation was still a problem. But against that backdrop, certainly in the US at the moment, inflation is sort of falling. Core is still a little bit sticky, but certainly headline is falling, much sort of quicker. And we expect core to sort of follow that in the coming months. So on the back of that speech now, you'll expect the Fed to leave rates on hold in September. Although we should have a clearer picture of that once the PCE figures come out later this week. And then also the non-farm payrolls come out at the end of this week as well. But interesting as well, Fed Chair Powell did sort of comment that the US economy is much more resilient than was first thought. That saw equities recover because certainly, up until then, August had been a pretty dire month for US equities. Also saw interest rates back off as well. The 2-year backed off from sort of 5.20 to back below 5%. And the 10-year got closer to 4%. It was around sort of 4.20, currently trading around 4.10. Quite interesting data coming out of Japan as well. Their core inflation really is pretty low, currently around 2.8%. And overall, it's fallen to 2.9 from 3.2 in July. So, certainly inflation in Japan is sort of falling. Potentially that's maybe sort of a blueprint for the rest of the global inflation as these inflationary pressures do start to fall over the next sort of 3 to 6 months. And obviously, if that certainly is the case, then it does take a lot of pressure off the central banks. Now, oil's just ticked up just a little bit, currently around 81 and change. Obviously, as well, still got that Russian-Ukraine war sort of dragging on and really just becoming increasingly embarrassing for President Putin as a potential sort of a 2 to 3 week sort of campaign is now running into just over 1.5 years. And it would appear that potentially he's facing a lot of sort of internal pressure now because there seems no sort of clear picture for the Russian sort of aggression there and where it will end. And the UK as well, likewise, their inflation starting to fall, and that's obviously really good news. So potentially, have we seen the peak in UK interest rates? Similar story in the EU as well. At Jackson Hole, EU President Lagarde came out with the same sort of comments that the ECB is prepared to increase interest rates if needed to get inflation under control. But with inflation falling in the EU bloc, potentially again we've seen the peak of European rates. Also as well, a very small win as well with the German economy technically coming out of recession, printing a flat 0% growth for the June quarter. Now finally got some data out of Australia, the impact of the Women's World Cup. That was a pretty major increase there in retail sales. Did show a big boost there for the month, plus 0.5%, 2.1 year on year. That's really good news for the Australian economy, and as well, housing market as well. Their starts were sort of picking up and sort of moving in the right direction. With the potential moves coming out of China as well to try and stimulate their economy, there's sort of growing a little bit of optimism for the Australian economy now going forward. Now here in New Zealand, a pretty damning report coming out from the IMF, re the state of the New Zealand economy, and that comes on the back of the government announcing that potentially they're looking at trying to save a further $4 billion. Now, supposedly that's coming from savings, but really it's sort of cutting back on expenditure, which many sort of economists and analysts have been sort of pointing that the government had been spending too much money over the last sort of 6 to 9 months. And obviously, when you've got an election to try and win coming up in October, that's not really potentially good news out there for the government at the polls. But certainly as we head into next week now, certainly the political parties will be in full campaign mode. And that'll just be interesting to see what sort of impact that does have on the markets here. Interesting as well, the housing market here in New Zealand, again, showing some reasonable signs of recovery out there. Certainly the clear out rate at the auctions now is getting much better. And obviously, as we head into the sort of spring months as well now, potentially there'll be a little bit more stock coming onto the market. You've still got that, sort of major boost coming from migration numbers as well. Now, there are a couple of fixed interest offerings in the marketplace as well. Invertel have got a bond out there. And if you're interested in that, go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz. So if you're looking for income options, I say go to the website www.bayfinancialpartners.co.nz for lots of interesting articles, and we look forward to speaking to you soon.